So for this part of the module, we're looking at how languages are the same and how they're different. If you only speak one language, such as English, you may think that all languages are sort of similar to English in some ways, or you may think languages are completely different and you've never really thought about how they work. In fact, all languages are more similar than they are different. And that's because they are human languages, and humans use language for all the same purposes wherever they're spoken, and so they tend to be more similar in how they do things. We all have the same mouths and noses and tongues and things that produce the sound of languages, so we tend to have similar sounds. And then forms of languages. So we're going to look at what are called universals of language, and that is what are the kinds of things that human languages tend to do, and how languages differ in some ways. And we're going to look at the function of negation, which is a function of all languages do negation, and we're going to look at it in 3 languages. But first let's consider the universe of languages. So if we think of all languages being sort of out there in the universe, you may think that there's a lot of languages that fall into this sort of languages I recognize category, and that there may be some that are sort of kind of out there. So if you're an English speaker, maybe you think of Hindi as out there, or a language you don't even maybe have any familiarity with, but you've heard that Kung language is spoken in Australia. You may think, well, that's out there. And if you're a Star Trek fan, you may have seen an episode where they had the Klingons produce a language, and so they actually hired a linguist to produce the Klingon language. And that would have been way out here in the universe, really different from what normally languages do. But in reality, most languages fit within this universe. Some are kind of out there, and most of them are in the universe of languages. When we talk about language universals, we think of this universe of languages like this context, where in the center or the core, these are things that most languages do. They tend to want to do it this way. And then there are languages that do things pretty weird, and so they're out in the periphery. And so we're going to look at 3 languages. We're going to look at English, French, and Spanish. And we're going to see where, when doing negation in these languages, whether they're in the core or in the periphery. And if you're an English speaker, you're probably cheering for English to be in the core. Nice core thing. Turns out English is in the periphery with French. Spanish is in the core. But let's see how that works. So this is what negation is. You take an affirmative statement, I know. I know. It's affirmative. If you want to negate that, in English, you would say, I do not know. And look at the difference between I know and I do not know. Where did the do come from? And then we have the not. So that's what English does. So I is a pronoun. The do is called do support. The not is the negative particle, and this is the verb know. Turns out in English, verbs like know can't do negation by themselves. They need help. So they get do support. So if you're going to negate, most verbs in English are going to need a do. I don't teach, I don't know, I don't walk down the street, I don't drive that car anymore. You have to have the do support, and then you have the negative particle. And I'm not even getting into the fact that that you contract this. I don't know. Here's French negation. For the same sentence, I don't know. Je ne sais pas. So the pronoun is je, I. Ne is the negative particle. C'est is the verb know. Pas is another negative particle. So French has two negative particles. English has one, and it goes before the verb. In French, you have one that goes before the verb and one that goes after the verb. And then you also have contraction, because they say je ne sais pas. They don't say je ne sais pas. They say je ne sais pas. And it turns out that in spoken French, particularly Parisian French, this ne is disappearing. You can't hear it really. Je ne sais pas, je ne sais pas, je ne sais pas. So it probably will disappear. And that's how language universals work. It's like, we don't need two negative particles. That's too many particles. One is enough. Let's get rid of one. We can't really hear that one. Let's get rid of that one. But who knows how many hundreds of years that will take, but that's where it's going. Spanish negation for the same sentence, I don't know, is yo no sé. I is the pronoun, I. No is the negative particle, and the verb is sé, no. Yo no sé. One negative particle, no do supports, no contraction, no nothing. Just simple, put a no in front of the verb. That's a simple negation rule, and it turns out that this is as simple as it gets. So a child learning English as a first language will say, no mommy, no drink, no cookie. Well, probably not no cookie, no broccoli. And so they will tend to make the negation just like this. Just put a no there. They won't go for the, I don't want that, mommy. First they'll say, no, mommy. So Spanish has the more core of universal grammar. So here's Spanish, yo no sé. Here's English, I do not know. And here's French, je ne sais pas. So in terms of universals, the Spanish is in the core. It does the simplest way to get to negation, and in the periphery are English and French. And when you're in the periphery, these things will tend to change over time because humans want their language to be efficient and easy, and as English becomes more globalized or more people speak French, then these things will be attended to push it into the core to be simple like Spanish.